Thanks to the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. I want to thank Bert Soren, my opening act. Much like Joe Rogan, I only bring on the best opening acts. So, no, my name's Josh Smith. I own Montana Knife Company. It's kind of a surreal thing. I was originally going to do a sharpening demo here. We kind of talked about that, but frankly, that would be a better thing. If you're interested in that, come to my booth. It's easier to work with you one-on-one, and you can kind of see it more close up and ask questions. And instead, Rocky Mountain Elk and I kind of talked about doing a story about our company, and there's a few things. There's some ties to the Elk Foundation, and there's also some ties to Sornex that just went before us. And really, honestly, just kind of a cool story, I guess, about kind of keep working hard and keep moving forward, keep pushing that snowball up the hill. So 2 years ago, basically this week, I went to Total Archery Challenge in Big Sky, Montana, and I knew probably 3 people, and they were all Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation employees. It was kind of a crazy time. I had decided I was going to launch this company, and I'll get into more of how we kind of did that. But when my wife and I started pulling into Big Sky for that, Brandon, my business partner, called me and said, "Hey, your website's live." And we were pretty excited about that. And so the next morning we went to TAC, and I started walking around trying to network and meet people and kind of tell people this idea, this company I wanted to have. And I actually met John Dudley there, and I gave him a knife, and he was busy working with a bunch of people, and I met a bunch of other really cool people. And what's really neat about the Total Archery Challenge, the hunting community, and quite frankly, the knife community, is it's a really tight-knit group, and people are willing to help. And so at that event, Big Chino was there. I'd been suggested to go introduce myself to them, kind of hang out in their booth, and then through them, we started meeting other vendors, and people just started kind of like welcoming us in and letting us hang out in their booth and just kind of BS with everybody and get our stuff out. And so right after that event, we drove down here to Park City, and I kind of did the same thing, just walking around introducing myself and getting to know people. And quite frankly, I wanted to do kind of what the knife community was to me, was just develop friendships first. It wasn't about marketing and sales. I was giving knives out to people, no strings attached, just use them, see what you think. And I just wanted to develop kind of a family network of people. And I didn't know how I was going to do that or who that was going to be. So that kind of led us into meeting some of these really cool people. And I want to go back to how I started making knives and lead back into where we are today. And I talk about the Elk Foundation. I'm actually from a small town in Montana, Lincoln, Montana. It's about 80 miles east of Missoula, and Missoula is the headquarters for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. It's right on the edge of the Bob Marshall Wilderness. We're famous for the Unabomber, which is pretty cool, I guess. Unless you got a package from him, that wouldn't be so cool. But so little tiny town, logging town in Lincoln. Really neat little place. And I was a Little League baseball player. I was 11 years old, and I was going to practice, and this guy, Rick Dunkerley, he was my coach, and he'd bring his knives to practice, and he would show parents. And most of the parents are hunters, and of course, I'm a little 11-year-old boy. I think those knives are cool. So I kind of pestered him, and I was always asking him about them. And so my parents bought me one of his knives for Christmas that year, and right after that, he invited me to his shop to learn how to make a knife. And I made 1 or 2, and I think I probably was constantly pestering him to come back to his shop. And Rick was pretty direct. He was basically like, "Hey, you want to be a knife maker, you got to make them on your own shop." And so he continued to help me, but I had a lawn mowing business at the time, and my parents owned an excavation company. So I was always earning money, and I decided I'm going to put my money into building a knife shop. So I bought a belt grinder, and I started buying little tools, and I was putting them in my dad's shop. My dad's pretty tidy, and pretty soon, after about a year of doing that, I was making a real mess of my dad's shop, dust everywhere. And so he's like, "You need your own shop." So we enclosed a little lean-to, about a 10 by 10, about the size of our booth right over there. And my dad didn't want to have to rebuild my benches every year, so he built my benches at the height he thought I might end up someday. and he made me stand on a milk crate to stand at my grinder. And there's pictures of me in Blade magazine standing on a grinder, standing on a milk crate, grinding blades. So anyway, I kind of went after it, quite honestly, and that's the one thing I don't think I was necessarily that talented or savant or anything like that. I just, in the morning, at night, after school, before school, weekends, I was grinding and making knives. And of course, my parents used that against me. So if I was a bad kid, they would threaten to lock my doors on my shop. So I generally stayed on the straight and narrow. And honestly, I just kept working. And really what I was looking for was approval, I think, with my knives from Rick and some of these other knife makers. And I'd take my knives to Rick and I'd show him. He'd be like, yeah, it's not very good. It's a little better, but you're not doing this right and you're not doing that right. And what I didn't know at the time was I was surrounded by men that were about to become world-class knife makers themselves. And I just happened to be learning from guys who, not at the time, but as it turned out, were world-class. And so we kind of went on this rocket ship through grade school, junior high, and high school of me trying to catch them, and they were trying to catch some legends ahead of them. And we were all just working hard. We were going to these events, these hammer-ins, which were much like a party or a conference where guys would teach how to make knives and the new techniques. And it was a really cool thing because this was before the internet, which makes me sound ancient. But there was no YouTube, there was no Instagram. The only way you could network or learn anything was to go communicate with somebody, go seek out that information, ask. So I'm a little kid and I'm going up to these rough and gruff old men asking. They were old, they were like my age now, but at the time they were old. I was going up and I was asking them tips and tricks and how do you do this and how do you do that. And what was really cool about that community, it was sharing. Rarely did I ever get a, hey, beat it, kid. They were always willing to share. And so I was always willing to take their criticism and try to make better and better knives. And so as time went on, I set some goals. I wanted to become the youngest master bladesmith in the world. So I joined the American Bladesmith Society, started pushing towards that, and at 15 years old, I tested for and became the youngest journeyman knife maker in the world. And that's kind of a process that you have to go through where you have to, it's a test. And there's a performance test, and then there's a test of how your knives look and how they're made. And so on the performance test, you have to chop a 1-inch rope in half in one chop, and that just tests sharpness of the blade. The next part of the test, you have to chop 2 2x4s in half. Many chops as you want. You can whittle the thing, you can chop on it, whatever you want, without resharpening. But once you get through your second 2x4, there can't be any deformation to the edge, no chips, no dents, dings, whatever. And that blade still has to be able to shave hair. That tests the edge holding ability, the wear resistance of the edge. Is it tough? If you're hitting a knot, is it chipping out? Is it denting? The last stage of that performance test is you have to take a blade and you have to bend it 90 degrees in a vise without breaking it. What that tests is toughness. There's hardness and there's toughness. And toughness is the ability to take a deflection or bend. The hardness is in relation to wear resistance. How long does that blade hold an edge? How many cuts can I get through rope or elkite or whatever? But if the blade's too hard, it doesn't have any toughness. It's really a test of metallurgy and heat treating. And so I passed that part, and then I went on to the Atlanta Blade Show and I presented 5 knives to a panel of mastersmith judges. They judge your fit and finish. What's your design like? How well is the knife built? Are your grinds straight and all that kind of stuff. So I passed that at 15. And then 4 years later at 19, I tested for the mastersmith test, which is basically the same test, but with Damascus steel. You got to make a performance blade out of 300 layers of Damascus to do the rope and the board and bend. And then you present 5 knives again. One of them has to be a Quillian dagger, which is a very difficult knife to make. But that time they judge you very harshly. There really can't be anything wrong with your knives. And at that time, I passed it. So I became the youngest master bladesmith in the world. I got a lot of notoriety for that at the time, a lot of magazine coverage and whatnot. And it was cool, and it's definitely an accomplishment. I think it spoke more to my consistency and my hard work. than it did my ability maybe at the time. The one thing I say about the Mastersmith test, and I think it's like anything, I don't care if you finish Navy SEAL BUDS training or you become a master bladesmith, when you first come out of that, are you really truly a master? Are you really truly a SEAL? And my argument is that you don't really ever master something completely. It takes a lifetime. I'm still learning a lot. I look back at the knives I made when I was 19 and, you know, night and day to today. So anyway, after the Mastersmith test, I duck hunted my way right out of college, flunked out of 1 year, drank too many beers, shot too many ducks. I was asked to not come to class in my waders anymore, so we didn't go to class, and we fixed that problem. I went back, I worked in my parents' excavation business, got married, moved to Missoula, western Montana, right at the home of the Elk Foundation. And my wife at the time, we started building a house, and the day we closed on our house, I quit my full-time job and became a full-time knife maker. Couldn't quit before because the bank would have been frowned upon. And so I started making knives full-time, and I made knives full-time for about 10 years, 9 years, custom knives, and I really was rocketing up kind of the knife world as far as notoriety. I really was getting to a level I was pretty decent, and things were going pretty well on the knife side, but that's a tough way to make a living. One knife at a time. They were very high-end. My average knife was probably $3,000 or $4,000, $2,000. That's a tough thing to sell, and you can't hire anyone to help you. You're an artist; they want you to do it. And I have a huge respect for craftsmen, artists, knife makers, blacksmiths, people that make a living that way, because it's a hard way to make a living. Throughout that time period, we got to about 2008, 9, the economy started kind of going downhill, and I was assessing at that time. Now I had 4 young kids. I was looking at this economy, and I was looking at my order list, and people were wanting to wait on a $5,000 knife. They're like, my stocks are down, the economy's bad, you know, so I'm going to wait. And I was thinking, man, the longevity of this is tough, and if I want to go elk hunting for a week, I don't get paid for a week. At the time, I was teaching a guy how to make knives, and he worked for the power company, and he had 401k and paid vacation and benefits, and if he screwed something up at 4 o'clock, they paid him double time to fix it all night. And I thought that was a pretty cool idea, so I decided to quit making knives full time, and I took a job with the power company. I was going to become a welder, and I had my backhoe operating experience from growing up, and they basically hired me to dig for them and to learn to be a welder. That was a pretty cool time. I got an apprenticeship. I started looking around the room after I got hired, and I realized everyone with gray hair in that room was a lineman, not a welder. And I started realizing I'm going to have more opportunity on the line side, and it's kind of cool what they do anyway. They get to climb poles, they get to hike through the mountains and cut trees out of lines, and they do a lot more cool stuff. And so I got a groundman job, I became an apprentice, and 3.5 years later, I became a journeyman lineman. And through that time period, I was really missing making knives full time. You know, I had the security, but I wasn't necessarily happy. I got a divorce during that time. My house burnt down. It's kind of amazing they didn't write a country music song about it, quite honestly. But the dog didn't run away, which is good. So anyway, I kind of went through a time period there where my house burned down. I'm a single dad. I'm living in a camper with my 4 kids. We're building a new house. My kids were really resilient through that time. And quite honestly, I was going to work, doing my day job, coming home at night, washing dishes, folding clothes, doing whatever dad's got to do when you're single. And I met my new wife right in that time period. And she gave me the freedom and the time to be able to go to my shop at night. She's like, hey, I got the house. Go out and chase your dream. And I told her about this idea called Montana Knife Company. And I want to step back real quick in that time period, tying the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. As a kid, when I was 15, 16, I actually was donating knives to the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation banquets that were around. And that's the first time I ever saw one of my knives go for $1,000. And I was a little kid and I was stoked because one of my knives went for $1,000 and I was selling them for $60. So I thought, man, I should raise my prices. I didn't understand the whole idea of like people getting a little carried away with whiskey in them. So that was explained to me later. The other thing that happened at the Elk Foundation is a lady won a Remington 7mm mag hunting rifle, and I was all about it. I wanted that gun, 7mm Remington mag with engraving and a sheep on it, ram's head, and she didn't hunt. And she's like, hey, you make those little miniature knives. If you make me one of those, I'll give you that gun. So I made one the next day. And I've now got, my daughter shot her first elk with it. My kids have shot deer with it. I've still got that hunting rifle. So I kind of thought that was cool as far as tying into the Elk Foundation. Back as a kid, and 30 years later, standing on this stage talking to you guys at the Elk Foundation and explaining my whole story. So I thought that's kind of cool. But anyway, back to where we were. I didn't write a script on this, so I'm bouncing around a little bit. Met my wife. She's encouraging me to get to my shop. And I told her, if I ever go back making knives full time, I want to do this Montana Knife Company. And actually, I registered the name Montana Knife Company with the state of Montana when I was 19 years old. I had this goal. I wanted to start this knife company, but you can't start a knife company when you're 19. You don't know anything about running businesses and brands. And frankly, I wanted to chase becoming one of the best knife makers in the world first and develop my reputation. And I love making custom knives. So I didn't have the money to start a brand. I didn't know how to do it. Starting a big factory seemed like it was an impossible task. So I told my wife about this idea, and of course, right at the time, she goes, well, you should just quit your job and do it. And I was like, well, hold on. We got to pay the bills. And so we kind of talked about it for a while. A friend of mine kept encouraging me to do it. And there was a lot of talk and not a lot of action for a while. But I was back into the making of the knives. I did the show Forged in Fire a couple times, went and competed there, and was kind of back in the game a little bit, and it felt good. And quite honestly, it's like a smoker. Once you smoke one, you want them all. And so when I was making those knives, I was like, I got to get back to this. So I decided to go for it, and I made some prototypes, and I went to this little event called Winter Strong. That's an event that my opening act, Bert Soren, puts on with Sornex out in South Carolina. And what's cool about that event that year is I was actually invited by another knife maker, Neil Kamamura. Neil's like, hey, I'm going out there to forge. You should come demo. Neil and I didn't really know each other well, but Neil kind of knew my reputation in the knife world. And he's like, you should come forge with me. And what was cool about that is he was sharing the spotlight. He could have gone to that. He could have soaked up all the attention from that deal, but instead he shared the forge with me, and he let me come meet that group of people. And what's cool about Winter Strong is there's people from all kinds of different brands, from the outdoor industry, from the fitness industry. And what's amazing is Bert collects people and a few knives, but he really collects cool people. And everybody there was incredibly supportive, and they were like, man, you got to go after this. You got to do this. We have your back. And I came away from there having been around unbelievably driven and successful people with a renewed sense of passion and drive. And quite frankly, I realized that, no offense to anybody, but I had been hanging around a lot of crabs in the bucket. The people that when you start to crawl out, they pull you down, or they tell you, like, that's really hard to do, or, oh, the economy's bad, or there's always an excuse as to why you shouldn't do something. And I just hung out for a whole weekend with people that had all achieved great success in all different facets of their life, and they were saying, go for it. We got your back. And so I came home. I was super stoked about that. I met my business partner, actually through a connection at Winter Strong. Hired him to do some photography for me. He built me a website. And we kind of started going after it. And that's really about the time that we went to Big Sky TAC. Brandon and I weren't even business partners at that point. He was an employee. Or not an employee. I was hiring him to do some photography and some video. I didn't have any employees at that point. So throughout the summer, leaving TAC, things just started ramping up. And some of the connections I made at TAC started taking place. And that snowball started building. And I started realizing how good Brandon was at what he did, and I realized I can't afford to pay this guy. So I offered him a partnership in my company, and a pretty hefty partnership. And what I wanted was him all in. I didn't want him to have 5% of my business, or 2%, or 10%. It's not 50-50, but it's damn close. And the point was I didn't want it to be an afterthought to him. I wanted it to be his passion, and I wanted him to go after it like I was going to. And as it turns out, I found the perfect person and a business partner, and we both, I think, try sometimes to outwork each other, and we both fail, which is really cool. We're both after it all the time. And so he wore a lot of hats, I wore a lot of hats, and we started going. And we started working, and we started making knives. In December 31st of 2020, that was a pandemic year when we launched this company, which also seems like a bad time to quit your job. Brandon quit his job and I quit my job. So January 1st, 2021, we're all in. And we started pushing and pushing. And we started working our connections and mailing out knives. We didn't have any money to pay influencers. We didn't have any money to run ads. We didn't have any money to take a paycheck. No paychecks, no employees. We just started going. And we started adding a little bit of help here and there, through a lot of the support, through the connections at Total Archery Challenge, through Sorenex and Winter Strong. Things started building. And 2 years later, here we are standing on this stage, and we've got 52,000 knives in production. We've got 30-some straight sellouts on our website. Our knives are all over this mountain, all over the knife community, and we're one of the fastest growing outdoor companies in the country. And yeah, thanks. And I don't say that stuff to brag, but instead I say it to basically don't quit on your dream. Set a plan, set a goal, and just keep working for it. And sometimes you got to quit your job. You got to go at it a different way. You got to go at it a different angle. You might have to work another job to raise money to launch that company. You might have to find help in a business partner, admit you can't do it all, ask for help from friends, give stuff away, don't expect anything in return for it, and just keep working and keep pushing the snowball. Now, the mountaintop's way up here, and we're still way down in here. We haven't accomplished anywhere near the goal. We're basically working out of a glorified 2-car garage. We're building a brand new production facility right now. We've got about 9 employees. They're awesome, they're amazing, we're adding more, and we're continuing to build, and we're continuing to kind of push. But the point is American manufacturing and the American dream is not dead. It's alive and well. Thank you. You can accomplish anything you set out in this country. All the opportunity in the world is out there, but you got to work your ass off. You got to work hard, and you got to go after it, and you got to do it the right way. I really do feel like we've done it the right way. We haven't. We're not gonna adjust our values based on sales or a connection. We've had certain opportunities that have come along that didn't seem to fit Montana Knife Company. The mission of Montana Knife Company, or the motto of it, is working knives for working people. We are working people, and I think we're surrounded all the time by working people. Farmers, ranchers, welders, loggers, linemen, it goes on. Strength coaches, archery professionals, it doesn't matter if you're making backpacks or whatever. Everybody's working hard, and I really truly believe we often hear too often on the news that it's not possible. Things are unfair. You got to go overseas with your business in order to make money. I had a knife maker tell me, it was in the middle of the pandemic. He's from California. He's a good friend of mine, amazing guy. And I was showing him my little prototype of my knife, the Blackfoot. And I named it the Blackfoot after the Blackfoot River Valley that I grew up in, because you can pretty much use that knife on anything in that valley. I was showing him that knife, and I was explaining to him what I was about to try and do, and he was like, yeah, dude, that's not possible. And he showed me a folding knife that he was having made in China and sent over, and he was reselling them. He was getting them in for a certain amount of money and selling them. And it's a pretty damn nice little knife, actually. And he was explaining to me, like, look at this quality. And dude, I'm only getting this thing for 39 bucks. I'm selling it for $250, like all this. And I was like, I'm not doing that, dude. Like, I am not doing that. Like, I am going to sink or swim by making stuff in America. That's it. And we're going to make it in Montana because it's Montana Knife Company. Now, in order to start this company, I had to do it the best way I could. So we started utilizing some people from around the country, outsourcing some work here and some work there. A lot of it we're doing ourselves. And now that we are where we are, we're starting to bring that stuff in. We're building the building. We're starting to build the brand. We're bringing what we can in. And the goal is to be one of the largest knife companies in the world in another 5 years. And I think it's absolutely possible. And I think it's possible to do it right here in America without sending your stuff overseas. So anyway, that's where we sit today. It's an absolute honor to be here. Montana Knife Company is more than a knife. It's an idea. It's a feeling. It's a particular kind of person that I feel like we're making our knives for. You know, they're not the cheapest knives out there. Hunters actually cracked me up a little bit. They'll spend $250 on a pair of pants. They'll spend $100 on a base layer and a mid layer and an over layer and then some rain gear. They'll buy a $3,500 spotting scope and a $2,000 scope and a custom-made rifle and all this stuff. And they'll lift their truck so they can get over the rocks in the mountains, and they'll buy new tires, and they'll buy a new truck like my employee did. She shouldn't have done that. They'll do all that, and then they'll go to Shields and they'll buy a knife for $19 because it's the cheapest one in the cabinet. But that knife you might actually have to depend on for your life. I always feel like when you go in the mountains, you should have a fixed blade knife on you. You should have something that's strong that you can get yourself out of a bind in. So the other thing about our knives, though, they might not be the cheapest knife out there. The fact that we're making them in the U.S. and we're giving back. We put on a veterans event our first year in business, the year I quit my job and the year I didn't take a paycheck until June. We put on a veterans event and we flew 20 veterans into Montana and taught them how to forge in September. So the point is with that is before we grew and we had millions of dollars to spend on charity, we were already starting to give back. And I've seen companies like Sornex and Black Rifle Coffee and a lot of the other brands here, Bow brands, and really everybody here do a lot of charitable stuff. And that's the kind of company I want to build, a company that supports community, family, supports our veterans, and our nonprofits like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. This year we had some terrible flooding down around southern Montana. Small town of Gardner was washed out. Red Lodge. And another knife maker, actually a custom knife maker, Will Stelter, he called me and he goes, "Hey, we should build a knife together and raise some money." And I said, "That sounds good." So we wanted to do a collaboration. So I got on the phone with Brandon. I said, "Hey, let's come up with a design, maybe a shirt design or something to go with this knife." Will called it Come Hell or High Water. Brandon came up with an awesome logo. And the next day, we launched the Come Hell or High Water fundraiser. Will and I built a knife over the next couple weeks. Brandon started pushing shirts and hats out for chances to win that knife. And 1 month later, we had sold and raised, actually, a total of $82,000 that we're donating to flood victims in Montana. So, thanks. The point here is as we grow, we want to also give more. We want to give back, and we want to emulate and follow the lead of some of the really great brands in this industry. And I don't think you see a lot of that from companies that are making their products in China. And, when there's small towns like that in Montana that get flooded out, it's usually the brands that are in Montana that help support that. I know Stone Glacier donated to that. Sitka jumped in on it. Eberly Stock donated to it. Some other and other brands. So, and I know I'm forgetting some, but those brands all jumped in on that just after seeing ours, and they just offered to do it just out of the goodness of their heart. So it's a really cool community we're in. We're excited and glad to be a part of it, and I appreciate you guys having me up here.